This is BBC Sussex.
Loving where we live.
With Alison Ferns.
Time now to meet our My Life guests this afternoon. Ollie Tunmore and Sue Mason join me in the studio. What's lovely, I think, is when you do a story on the show and then you get to revisit it. And I can't actually remember how long ago it was that you were last with us, Sue, but it's got to be...
Oh, a couple of years, Alison.
At least,
yes,
I would say.
It could be 2 or 3.
And you very kindly, back then, shared your story with us about your HIV diagnosis. And interestingly, back then, we had to give you a different name.
You did, yes.
Whereas now, you're more than happy for me
out
to
and
say
open and
you're
proud.
out and open.
Absolutely,
this
yes.
is Sue Mason. Now, there was an important reason back then why you wanted to kind of keep it private.
Yes, it was my daughter. She was still at school and I was very mindful of, what she would experience at school. So, now she's left and now 21. I've had the permission to go out, which is very nice. But, that was one of the reasons. And one of those reasons, Alison, which we're fighting on a daily basis is stigma.
Yeah.
People not talking about HIV because of stigma, because of what they may get reactions to, if someone found out their status, and also within a family as well, what the children would experience, what loved ones would experience because of someone else they know that's living with HIV.
Well, I remember when you talked to us before about some of the stigma you yourself had come up against. Just remind us of your situation.
Well, as I say, it's been 13 years now diagnosed with HIV, but when I was first diagnosed, I was incredibly shocked and angry because I thought I should have known something more about it. But hey ho, I got my diagnosis, and that was only being in a relationship of 18 months, Alison. I'd been in a marriage before that, so that relationship broke down, and then my ex-partner got diagnosed HIV. Now, he came to tell me that he was HIV positive. He didn't have to, but he was a nice and caring man. And he gave me the opportunity to go and get tested. And that's the only reason I went for a HIV test, Alison, because I had no signs or symptoms. So I was very lucky that he did that. Now, unfortunately, when I did get my diagnosis, he passed away. He had late-stage HIV diagnosis and he was too ill to take the medication. So really, I tell my story on massive platforms and one of the reasons is because of him, because he came to tell me of his diagnosis and that got me to get tested. And obviously I kept that a secret for many years from my daughter. My daughter was only 8.5 at the time when I was diagnosed, and she was 14 when I eventually built up the courage, and that was also to do with stigma as well, to tell her. And the day is so clearly after all these years, Alison, I remember knocking on her bedroom door this particular day, and I said, oh, Mum wants to just have a quick word, and the eyes went up to the ceiling thinking, oh, Mum's banging on about stuff again, and she didn't realise what I was going to be banging on about. And then I told her that, Chris, my ex-partner, didn't die of cancer, one of the many lies I'd told, because of stigma. And I said, Mum's been diagnosed also with HIV because Chris was diagnosed just before he passed away. Never ever forget what she said to me. Well, that's it then, Mum, isn't it? You're going to die. And I said no, because I'm on effective HIV treatment. I've been promised a normal life expectancy. She is one of the other reasons, Alison, why I stand out and stand up. I've been called an activist. I don't know about that, but I will never forget what my daughter said, and I will never forget the reaction. And I don't want any other family ever, if possible, to go through that.
And your daughter's reaction, really, I'm guessing, is one of the reasons, Ollie, why you wanted to make your documentary, because your documentary is all about how people are living with an HIV positive diagnosis.
Absolutely, yeah. It was always from the offset, it was the idea to do it positively. I didn't want to do some kind of, some sort of sad sob story about it, because there is so much positive work being done at the moment, in the future, already in recent years. So from when the idea came to me, it was always something positive. It was always going to be uplifting and looking ahead to the future.
So why did you want to do it, and how did you go about getting people to take part?
So I was actually on placement in Brighton at the time at a PR agency, and I do media production at Bournemouth University, and we don't do dissertations. We do creative projects instead. And I was determined to go back because I was out for a year, so I was determined to use that time to come up with some sort of idea. I wanted to do something with purpose. I didn't want to just do an assignment ticker, I wanted to do something that actually had longevity and purpose and reason behind it. And I just visited a THT clinic, as you do, I was just having a regular checkup, and the idea, I literally had a sort of light bulb eureka moment as I was in the clinic. I thought, this charity is so fantastic. How can I, as just one individual, give back to a charity that does so much for so many different communities? And
that charity being Terence Higgins Trust.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I went back and I had a Skype call with my tutor back at Bournemouth, and I said, this is something I want to do. How feasible do you think this is? Do you support this? And he said, absolutely. The best way to go about this is to actually try and reach out to the charity and try and pitch to them effectively like a client. So I went back the next day, left my details, told them a bit about me and what I want to do. And then I was forwarded on to Sue, who heads up the Positive Voices campaign from the Brighton Clinic. And we met for a coffee. And the rest is history, really. It just it developed from there. I kind of set out what I want to do. Sue set out what THT would want to do if they're involved, which thankfully they did get involved. And we quite quickly sort of established that, this project isn't just for men or just for LGBT plus community, it's for everyone, from listening to the pieces and from watching them on YouTube. That people can do, you can see very clearly, HIV affects anyone and everyone. There's not a single person that is immune to it or it isn't relevant to. So therefore, this project and these stories are relevant to everyone. And
I think, I don't know if you agree, I think things are improving in terms of stigma, but I think there is still a lot of... I don't know, people have stereotypes, don't they, about the type of people they think could get HIV. I remember when we aired your story, Sue, the thing that seemed to shock most people is that you were a woman of a certain age.
Absolutely.
You were in a straight relationship. And people were like, oh, but how could that happen to someone like you?
Yeah. And I think this, and I'll put my hand up. I remember what it was like in the 80s, and I remember the letters coming through when there was that massive campaign, don't die of ignorance, and it really scared a lot of people back then. And I think a lot of people are still thinking that, and it still happens to certain groups because of that. And probably what we're finding still when we go into our Brighton schools, that we're actually educating the parents of the children we're educating. So, we're educating the young people. They're going back, talking to mum and dad and grandma and aunties and uncles, and they're probably thinking, well, actually, we don't remember. We remember like I remembered it. So we have come a long way. We have come a massive way, with the medication about, we have some drops in HIV, 19-20% in London just last year in diagnosis, and that was to do with the PrEP drug. So we've got some massive great things that are happening, but we still have stigma.
What's the worst stigma you've come up against personally?
Well, it's just something that only happened just a year ago. I'm very open as well with my GP. I went to see my GP, unrelated to HIV. I went there. I had to go for some particular woman's thing, and I'm sitting there, and he's got all my details on the screen, and he's sort of tapping away and looking on the screen, and he turns around to me and he said, "Oh, I see you're HIV." I said, "Yes, doctor." And then he turns back to me and looks me straight in the face, and he said, "Where did you get that from? Where did you get that from?" Now, if I hadn't been a lady, I might have said something quite rude, but I was a lady, and I thought, well, hang on. And Ellie said, "I got it on the bus coming here."
Yeah, you're the doctor, mate. Where do you think?
And I quite openly said to him, "Alison," and I looked him straight in the face, "from unprotected sex, doctor." And as he shuffled his paper, we got on with the consultation that I was there for. But I didn't take that as a negative. I thought, okay, GP surgeries. We need more education because, they only have a certain amount of HIV relevant education within, their field. So that's another reasons why we work with, practitioners to give that personal impact of someone living with HIV on how they would like to and appreciate to be treated.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good on you. Sue was one of the people that took part in your documentary,
Yes.
Along with 2 others. Was it quite difficult to get people to share their stories on camera?
So it was immediately one of the biggest concerns I had. When I decided we were definitely going ahead with it, I thought, well, how on earth am I going to find these people? I was prepared to sort of give it a go, on Twitter and, word of mouth and everything. But thankfully, Sue actually worked with me very closely throughout a lot of the steps of production for the piece. So Sue very kindly said that she was more than happy to share her own story. So that was fantastic. That was one box ticked. And then we worked together to then find the other 2. So one is a lovely man called Carl and one is another man called John. And they both actually volunteer with Terence Higgins Trust themselves. Carl and Sue work a lot together. And John does a lot of talks himself in the local area, Sussex and Surrey. John actually came down to Bournemouth with this project to do a talk to Bournemouth University students. So that was fantastic. It was the first time that had happened. So it was thankfully not as difficult as I hoped because of Sue. But without Sue, it would have been a lot harder, I think. But yeah, the 3 of them together.
Well, we're going to hear John's story tomorrow and Sue's. Today we're going to hear Carl's story. Let's listen to it now.
My name's Carl. I'm a HIV positive gay man and I've been HIV positive for 7 years now. At the point of diagnosis, I had a body breakdown and I took myself to my local GP. Told him my symptoms, he gave me some antibiotics to take away for 7 days. And at the end of the 7 days, the medication, the antibiotics weren't working. I started to think a little bit more about things because I'd known I'd put myself in some risky situations previously. And it wasn't until a mate of mine pointed out to me and he said, I think you should go for a HIV test. And I thought about it more and I was like, okay, this could be what is classed as seroconversion, which is when HIV enters into the body, attacks the immune system and breaks it down. The changes I made at the time when I was diagnosed was more to do with my attitude towards HIV and other sexual infections as well. And I think the things I would kind of change for now is that I would have gone for a test earlier. If I'd known a little bit more about HIV at the time, or I had had some education about it, at least from school, and I hadn't, then maybe I would have clicked a little bit sooner. I did turn to a couple of people when I first got diagnosed. One, bizarrely, was my ex-partner's mum, and I confided in her that I'd just had a HIV test and it was positive. I remember telling my mum and dad that I was a gay man, 25 years ago, and it was very similar to that. And I remember the day really well. It was the 23rd of July, 2011, and it was the day that Amy Winehouse had passed away. And like I say, I just sat them down and I blurted it out, Mum and Dad, I'm HIV positive. And I remember my mum standing up at the table, and this was the table that we'd eaten our family dinners off for many years. And she stood up at the table, and I remember her tears rolling down her face and hitting the table. And that was a really kind of emotional moment for me because Mum and Dad didn't know about HIV, know a lot about HIV. They were aware of the scaremongering that we had back in the 80s of living with AIDS and dying of ignorance. And I think that was imprinted in their minds when I told them I was living with HIV. So I knew I had a job to do. And that job was to put them right and tell them that I was going to live a perfectly normal life and that I was going to live a healthy life as well. It's more of a personal touch when you go to the charity, and I think that you, in your area, do a little bit of research, find out what's closest to you, because the charities that offer the help and support, I've been working, in the UK for a very long time with people living with HIV, so they know what they're talking about. HIV is not something that you need to be frightened of anymore. With more education, the medication that also is provided to somebody living with HIV, all I ask you to do is go out there and send a positive message out for people living with HIV.
Carl sharing his story there. Massive thank you to you, Ollie, for letting us broadcast that part of your graduate project, hashtag Living Positive. People want to go and take a look at all of those videos. How could they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can be found on the Terence Higgins Trust YouTube channel. Just search Terence Higgins Trust, and they're the 3 most recent videos there. And they can follow all of the activity, recent media activity, with the hashtag Living Positive.
And if you've been affected by this conversation, if you want some help, some advice, you can always call the Terence Higgins Trust Direct Helpline. That phone number is 0808 802 1221. Ollie Tunmore, Sue Mason, thank you so much. Lovely to see you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in. And say tomorrow we'll hear some more from your graduate project. You are listening to Alison Ferns on BBC Sussex and BBC Surrey. Still to come today, we're going to be taking a look.